All right, they asked me to tie the 4 flies that I know. And before I start in, I'm going to tie 4, and a couple of them are really, really quick. But before I do, I wanted to mention one other fly, and I'll describe this in more detail in our meeting, but this is the RS2. And you'll notice the RS, it's hard to see, it's got some tail, got a couple tail fibers, but that's the profile of the RS2. A fellow named Rim Chung developed it. He developed this in Colorado. I saw his fly box one time, and honest to goodness, the only fly in his box was the RS2. Sizes, colors, and so forth, but it was the only dadgum fly in his box. But this is when I'm fishing the lower third of the water column, this is my dropper, just about exclusively. If I'm not using the RS2 as the dropper, I'm going to use the one that we're looking at here. It's the first one on your handout. It's called the IOBB. It ought to be banned, and it truly is patterned after another pattern called IOBO. That truly is. It ought to be outlawed. And it's a real simple pattern, but it's highly, highly effective.
And Dutch, is the RS2, is that a weighted fly or unweighted?
No, it's unweighted. And you'll note some interesting things about this, Jeff. You'll note, as small as this is, you still have a little taper to the body. But that's a simple profile. I'll talk a little more about it during the meeting, but essentially this is a trico, a mayfly trico pattern. And it's unbelievably effective. I wouldn't even hazard a guess how many fish I've caught on this. Barry and I were fishing one day in a community pond, and it was one of those days you just wear out your arm. We caught so many fish. Matter of fact, I got tired, so I just handed my rod to Barry, and he pulled it in and looked at the RS2, and there was one thread hanging off of it, and it was still catching fish. Yeah, it's a crazy fly, but highly, highly effective. You want to tie this in natural kind of colors, nothing stupid. You want tan, white, brown, black, not olive, but that's about it. This will be on a size 18 or 20. If you're fishing the cold hole at the lower Mountain Fork, you might consider a 22. I don't go any smaller than that, but this is a small pattern, not much to it, but it's deadly. It truly is. And I'll fish this one year round.
So do you fish that as the second fly, and the first fly is a big fly you could see? Because you could never see that fly.
That's a great question, Jeff. The people at A&M, and I believe anything that comes out of A&M as it pertains to fly fishing, those guys know. But they did some research and discovered that we all see things at 57 frames a minute, 57 frames a second. Fish see things at 17 frames a second.
Other way around.
Is it the other way?
Yeah.
Okay. Point is, they see things slowly. And so when a little tiny thing like this comes through current, it looks like a bowling ball, and it's coming real slow. But I've caught big fish on this. Fish I didn't think I could hook with it, but I've caught big fish, small fish. When we get into the meeting tonight, I'm going to talk some about rigging.
Okay. But
this would be the bottom fly. There's a few occasions where I'll have a rig where the bottom fly is actually, it's the bottom fly, but it floats up above the second fly intentionally. But this is typically intended to be a small bottom fly. And like I say, this will be my go-to choice for anything in the bottom third of the water column.
Okay. I
don't treat it as an emerging fly. That's when I get into this one. But it's really, really effective.
Okay, good, thank you.
Really effective.
That's what you use on the wing on that one.
Well, there's a lot of choices on that, Bill. CDC is a good one. On some of these patterns, I like to put a EP fiber, especially if it's on the top, because it has 0% absorbency. But for something like this, I get CDC puffs, and you just take a few pieces off of a CDC. But obviously you don't need much, and you want that kind of an angle on your wing, and it's back just a little bit. You might initially tie this with the wing a little bit too far forward, but for some reason Rim Chang decided it needed to come off the back of the top of the hook shank right there. And it's got two little tails. I think you can see them right there. Two tails. But it is a mayfly, and in particular a trico. It's deadly, I think, in Colorado because just about any month of the year, you can go to Colorado and find tricos. Guides will tell you they may have some spells during the coldest months where they don't see any, but if you're ever in doubt, just throw a trico in there, and it's going to look pretty good. So that's starting off with that. But occasionally, I'll put this one in the bottom third of the water column. And a couple things. On all my flies that are emerging patterns, I like to put a glass bead on there. And I'll say this probably several times, but I don't have any weighted flies. I don't believe in weighted flies. So I'll put a glass bead on there which weighs absolutely nothing to speak of. And the purpose of that is most aquatic insect species will develop a gas bubble to aid them in their emergence from the bottom. And a lot of them are toward the front. Sometimes they look like gills, but the glass bead is intended to I put those on just almost all of my emerging patterns. Normally I'll use a 14 or 16 aught Vivus. That's my favorite thread. Vivus 6 and 16 is made a little bit different than their other four sizes. The 4 and the 16 are made with a twist, two strands that are twisted. So you can actually flatten the 16 a little bit. And if you have a mind to create a dubbing loop with your thread, the 16 is a good one. And the reason I like Vivus is that when they first came out in the United States, there were a lot of independent tests testing Vivus because the claims they made were so outrageous about strength, breaking strength, and that type of thing. People didn't believe it. So there were a lot of tests being done, and essentially every test that Vivus, in any size, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, any size, was far and away the leader of the pack as far as breaking strength and so forth. Very, very, very strong thread. And I used to tie with 3/0 or 6/0, but many years ago got kind of involved with classic salmon flies, this type of thing. And I brought this actually to show that, you know, we can spend a couple, not a minute to tie the RS2. We can spend maybe a minute to tie the IOBO or IOBB, but you can spend a day or so on something like this. But when I was tying these, the people that tie these classic salmon flies, there's a culture, and they're very serious about what they're doing. And for example, one of the things that they frown upon is any bumps. Every thread wrap has to mean something. It has to go forward or backward. You don't put thread over a preceding wrap. There's only a few occasions where you ever do that. So they'll look at a fly pattern, and they're so precise that they'll look at thread bumps that were created that were unnecessary. So I got in the habit of using a very small diameter thread. And so normally I would dress this with a 14/0 Vivus. I only tie with white and black thread. If I'm tying a zebra midge or a chironomid pattern that requires a thread body, I might use a colored thread. Otherwise, everything is white or black, and it's white or black Vivus, and typically 14/0. Now, having said all that, this is GSP. And it's not because this fly needs to have something that strong, but when I'm demonstrating a pattern, I typically will tie with black or white GSP. And it will break, but it's not as likely to break as a 14 or even a 6/0 will break. So this is GSP, but it's .004. And when I'm using GSP, it's either .004 or 0.08. And the reason for that is it's very, very strong, not as likely to break. And if you ever get in a jam and you don't have your thread, .004 is the same diameter as your 7X tippet. It's not made exactly the same, but it's very, very, very close. So I've actually, when I heard that, of course I had to tie a fly with the 7X tippet, and it felt exactly the same.
What does that translate to?
I'm sorry?
What does that translate to, like 30 denier or 50 or?
Hey, Dutch, when we get a question from the audience, could you repeat it? So
Sure.
there's-
The question, we're talking about thread sizes, and I still go on the aught system, 14-aught, 3-aught, 6-aught, 8-aught, so forth. A 14-aught would be like a 50 denier or smaller, 30 denier. It's really, really small. But I like small diameter thread. I don't like any bulk on any of my patterns. And again, tying those classic salmon flies, I got used to a really small diameter. And when Vivas came on the market and they were touted as being strong, I tried it, and I haven't changed from Vivas for years. As a matter of fact, along the way, I had a chance to do an apprenticeship with a guy named Mike Redensich. And he turned me on to this vise and 14-aught thread as well. But I've never felt like I was at a disadvantage in any pattern I've tied, even foam bugs being a very small diameter. So to begin the thread, we do a jam hitch. It's not a jam knot. You hear it referred to as a jam knot. If this was a jam knot, go ahead and put that on there. If that was a jam knot, I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to pull it off. So this is a jam hitch. And I make a lot of references to thread control because that's one of the absolute foundations of fly tying. And I'm convinced that everybody kind of gets in a learning mode where you improve your fly tying skills and so forth. And then somewhere along the way, people say, how do I improve my fly tying skills? That translates into improving your thread control. You can learn more about materials and so on and so forth. You might challenge yourself with different kinds of patterns, but when you improve your thread control skills, that's when you really elevate as a tyer. So begin the jam hitch up here by the glass bead, and we're going to do wraps back toward the bend. Now this fly has to be on a curved shank hook like this. And we don't have a flat hook shank, so I can't refer to shank and start of the bend, but you'll see on this kind of a pattern, this kind of a hook, right about here, there's a more pronounced bend into the hook. So I don't want to go down any further than that. Now, typically on a curved shank hook, I turn my vise this way as I'm between steps right here, because if I keep it conventional, the thread can slide down. So this is always because of the curved shank of the hook. Okay. This is Crystal Flash. We can thank Barbie dolls for Crystal Flash. That's where this comes from. So there's always a discussion about where do you begin your thread. Some people say you need to begin at the eye and just lay a thread base all the way down and so forth. If you think about it, if you begin your thread where the first element's tied in, you're going to advance your thread as you proceed through the process of dressing the fly anyway. so the thread will stay ahead of you. You're always going to provide a thread base as you tie in the next element and so forth. So I don't subscribe to laying a thread base most of the time. So I've got that about where I want it, and secure. Now you notice when I took the tension off my thread, it bent the wrong way, so I do a little, I think everybody, is anybody here a beginner? Jim? Okay. For a right-handed tire, every wrap you make puts a clockwise twist into your thread. And after you continue to do that a period of time, you accumulate a lot of torque in your thread on the hook. And that's when you see this. When you let your thread just hang, it'll start to turn, trying to find the neutral spot. And it'll keep going back and forth until it gets all the twist out of it. But one of the big thread control skills is as you're wrapping material onto the hook shank and you relax the thread, the loop of the thread goes the wrong direction. And if you take that twist out of your thread, like I just did by spinning it counterclockwise, it takes all that clockwise twist out of it. Now when I come up here and relax my thread, you see how it bends toward the bend of the hook? Now I can catch material very easily right there. So it's a very simple thread control deal. Place my thread. Before I prepare the next material, you always place your thread ready to begin the next element. So I'm going to take about 3 pieces of peacock herl, and I tie them in by the butts. It's the strongest part of the herl, and I'll take, turn that one around. Now sometimes when you pull herl off out of even on a pack of herl, it's been pulled off of the rachis of the peacock feather, and so you get that white stuff on the end of right there. So you get that white stuff, so it doesn't really create a problem. But I like to cut that off. So I'm going to place. I got my threads now. I'm going to create the loop going in the direction I want, so I can catch my thread over the material right to the tie-in spot of the. Come forward. Stop right at the glass bead. I'm going to wrap. Now there's a couple ways to wrap this herl. Usually there's nothing artistic really to speak of with this fly, so I'm not interested in techniques that make it look pretty. But if I wanted to wrap this herl forward, like on a woolly booger, anytime you're going to use peacock herl like this, you can do a couple things. You can tie it in just loose strands like this. You can actually twist it in a clockwise direction, and it will cord. It makes a cord that strengthens it. I do clockwise because once again, every wrap I make, being a right-handed tire, is going to be a clockwise twist, so it tightens it. Same thing with dubbing. You always put clockwise in. So I could put a cord. Another thing I could do, I could even leave the strands as they are, and one simple technique is to wrap your thread, your peacock herl around the thread. Sorry, some question?
You caught the hook point with your thread.
Okay. Okay, so I can wrap the peacock herl around the thread. Another thing I typically will do with peacock herl is I'll leave the thread right here, and I'll begin to wrap going toward the eye without moving the thread with my hand. The thread, or the peacock herl, will advance the thread going forward, and what essentially that does, it helps to tighten it, but the peacock herl has little barbules that stick up off the rachis. And by rubbing against that thread as I'm wrapping, it straightens those out to get a little more vertical as I'm going forward. All the way right up to the glass bead. Wrap it 2 times around the thread, come straight up, the double half hitch, twist, Go underneath, tie it off. That's secure. Bring it upright. I want to flatten this crystal flash as flat as I can get, and I can do that with my thumbnail by just stroking it this way, flattening it. I'm going to pull this over the back of the fly. Not, if you pull too tight, it'll slide to one side or the other. So you don't want to pull too tight. You just want to lay it across the back. Once you have it in place, a couple wraps there, a couple wraps underneath. That's the fly. Doesn't that look a lot like an RS2? It sure does, and that's by design. Now when I put those last couple wraps on right here, right by the glass bead, I could have been a little more careful in making those wraps closer to the glass bead and not mashing the crystal flash wing down. If I did that, that crystal flash wing would be standing more upright. That's an option. You may like the look of that. You know, there's a lot of flies in fly boxes around fly shops in this country that are designed to catch anglers. Just keep that in mind. But on this particular pattern, I tend to do this kind of automatically with the wing on this fly because I want it to resemble the RS2. Simple. I even tie this sometimes with the tail, which I think is really stupid because the tail comes down here, and so I don't do that anymore. So the last part of this, I can whip finish. And the last thing I'll do, when you're clipping your thread at the front, never make it a scissor. Use the blade of the scissor as a blade, like a knife. And I'm going to come in here and just go forward, and that snaps that thread off. And you'll start doing that one time after you've gone to the head. You start cutting with your scissors, and you cut off hackle or legs or something else. So the last thing I'll do is I put what I would refer to as head cement across the back of this crystal flash. This is a Dave Etkin suggestion. Dave likes to put head cement on crystal flash, and because it just causes it to explode with vibrant. And by the way, this is my head cement. Healthy hoof. Over the years, I've used every head cement on the market. I've used Sally Hansen's, Hardest, all of those. But we used to buy this healthy hoof in gallon cans, and we'd use a paintbrush and paint this on the hoof walls of our ranch horses. And I got to thinking one day, well, dadgum, if that's strong enough to take care of a ranch or a hoof wall, when you consider all the nasty stuff they stand in, it might be pretty good on my head of my flies. It's a lacquer, and I mean, it's strong. As a matter of fact, if you go to you can get this on Amazon, actually, little bottles like this with a brush applicator. And all you guys know this already, but anything you have with a brush applicator, whether it's head cement, lacquer, UV resin, whatever, when you get it, the first thing you want to do is cut out about 2/3 of the bristles that come with the applicator, because there's too many bristles on there. If I go into a bottle of glue, right out, brand new bottle of glue, and I pull that brush out, it's got a glob, a bead on the base of that bristle. It's too big, typically, for the head that you're going to apply it to. So I cut out about 2/3, or 75% of the bristles on any kind of brush applicator. So when for example, here's my UV resin. Look at that applicator. I've cut that bugger down until it's just a few bristles, but I can put that UV resin exactly on the spot that I want it to be. with no problem at all.
Dutch, do you thin your healthy hook?
If you use it fast enough, no. You can if it gets kind of thick and
Cut it with acetone?
acetone, but I typically don't. But I've used this for a long time, and it's my preference. To get it, you can go on Amazon and get a bottle like this. I think a little box comes with a bottle of a dozen of these little bottles, and give them all to your friends. Or you can go to a feed store, a tack shop, something like that sells ranch supplies. And they may still have the big gallon things of Healthy Hoof, which is way more than you'd ever need. But around Dallas, if you go to a tack shop or a feed store, you're going to have to ask for it, because they keep this in the back. And they keep it in the back because over the years, ladies have discovered, hey, this stuff is like 10x Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails. And so they get it for their fingernails, and it really is good. So the feed store guys hide it, so they still have some for the ranchers. But that's the IOBB, an ought to be banned. Jeff, you want to send that one around?
Dutch, they sell that stuff at Sally's also. I buy water at Sally's.
Oh, good, good. Well, it's worth it. It's a good one. Now, the next one I want to tie is this one. Jack, you want to send that one around?
Sure.
This one is the next one on your handout. It's called the Cocky Bondi. And there's a little story behind this one. It's really fascinating to me. The Cocky Bondi gets its name two different ways. It was actually designed in 1600 in Wales. It's a Welsh fly, and in the Welsh language, it's B-O-N-D-H-U, but it's pronounced Bondi. Those words mean red beetle. Red beetle. So this fly, when it was designed, was named the Cocky Bondi because this fly is intended to replicate a beetle, a red beetle. This is a pretty timely fly because we're fast approaching terrestrial season locally, and you would want to use this fly, fish it any way you would a terrestrial. This is the hook on the first fly was a firehole stick. This one is a firehole stick as well. It's a scud pattern, scud hook. I like firehole sticks a lot. They're unbelievably sharp. They're barbless, and they're reasonably priced. I've never had one fail, but I really like them. I can't get a 4X in firehole, so I do something else. But for most everything else I tie, I can get a hook I need. So this one has to be on this type of a hook as well. But it got its name because it replicates a red beetle. Plus, the fly that's going around there, you'll notice the hackle on that is a furnace feather. And furnace is a feather that has a black stripe, I'll call it a stripe, right down the rachis, right down the stem. And once you get beyond that black, then the tips are typically another color. And on furnace, they're usually a ginger to a brown kind of a color. On the Cocky Bondi fowl, their feathers had a list or black portion and a tan tip, but beyond the tan tip was actually a little bit of red on the tip. Well, the people that designed this fly in 1600 liked that feather, so they used the feather from a Cocky Bondi fowl rooster, and that's the only thing feather you're allowed to use to tie this fly. Well, we can't get them anymore, so nowadays we use a furnace feather, and so a furnace feather could look like, these are furnace feathers. You can see how that one, it's got the black portion right down the rachis, right down the stem. colored on the tips. And the same thing here, a little bit, the black portion is called the list, a little bit more list on that one. And here's another one. The colors are pretty typical for a furnace feather. But typically today the Kakibandi is tied with furnace feathers. So we're going to use our same GSP, and there's some unique things about this pattern. We're going to start our thread hitch right about the middle part of the hook shank and go toward the bend, wrapping toward the bend. And I'm going to get over to the bend, and kind of like on the IOBB, we want to go far enough down the bend until we see it really dropping off. You want this curved profile, just right about there. But one of the traditional things about this one is they actually put, in the salmon fly world, you'll often see usually a metal tinsel material, the first element they tie in even before the tail, and it's called the tip or the tag. So this is tinsel, but it's silver on one side and it's gold on the other side. We're going to want this to show gold, so we're going to tie it in with the silver facing me. Catch it right there, tie it down to where I started. That first wrap of thread I went down, there was kind of like a marker for me, so I can see how far down I want to go with this. I'm going to get right down to about there, get my thread out of the way. Now I'm going to take this tinsel and I'm going to flip it over so the gold portion is showing. And I'm going to do 2 wraps going into the bend, and then 3 wraps coming back forward. Right to that spot right there. We're going to tie off that tinsel right there in the back. Now this body is also peacock curl, but there's an interesting twist on this one. You can find the Kakibandi being tied by many people on YouTube videos. Davey McPhail even ties, but Davey actually puts a little tail on this thing. It's a wispy kind of a shuck tail. It's not a mayfly kind of tail. Thank you, Dave. But there's a couple things unique about this. We're going to use a couple strands of peacock curl, and we'll prepare these the same way as we did the others. We'll get rid of those little white tips right there. And I'm going to tie that in so that peacock curl, not quite as much as the ostrich, but it's made in a way that there's actually one side of the pearl where the stem or the rake is a little more pronounced. And I tie that in so that that pronounced stem is forward. But here's what's unique about this pattern. It also has an ostrich curl tied in with the peacock curl. So you can see where this was just peeled right off the ostrich feather. So we can get rid of that stuff. And to prepare this, I'm going to peel barbs off the base right here so I can get a bare stem. And here's the challenge with ostrich curl. The rachis is flat. It's broad on one side, you look at it, and this side, so it's flat. It's not round or oval shaped. So it's very difficult to tie this in properly, and you get one shot. And you want to tie it in, so once it's tied in, the prominent rachis side is going forward. And you can see maybe the barbs on this. There we go, sorry. There they look like they might be coming straight out from the side of the stem or the rachis. But actually, it might be too small to see this, but actually, they go at an angle backwards. They don't come straight out 90 degrees. So you tie an ostrich hurl utilizing the flat rachis with a prominent stem going forward, so that when I wind this, that prominent side of the stem or the rachis is going forward. But the crazy thing is, I wind it with the peacock hurl. Some people will do these, they'll wind the peacock on, then they'll come back and do the ostrich hurl separate. You can actually do it right at the same time, no problem at all. So I can take all three, I don't twist them or anything, I'm just going to begin to wrap these going forward. Edge to edge. I never pull peacock hurl off like this. It can create a real train wreck, so you always want to cut your peacock hurl. Last thing we want to do with this is select one of these furnace feathers, and I think that one looks pretty good. I'm going to tie these in. I like to prepare hackle before you go to the hook shank. And typically what that will mean is you peel the barbs back like this, and I'll use it on this feather. I can take these barbs and peel them to the rear like this.
That's your above the
I'm sorry, thank you, Bill. Peel those back. Now I can do one of two things. I can take it with my fingers like this and pull it through and actually bend those barbs backwards. The other thing I can do is I typically have a hackle plier right here on the side of my stem of my vise, one of these type. Comes off the stem. I put the feather in here, and I bend those barbs before I even go to the hook shank. But for today, we're going to do it as we wrap it. And I'm going to put this, I'm going to pull some barbs forward, place it right where I want it tied in, secure it, edge-to-edge wraps going toward the eye. Now here I'm going to actually pull this back. I could cut that off. I could cut this tag end of that hackle off, but then there's going to be a stem sticking out by the eye. It's ugly. You need to clean up on aisle 3 on that deal. So you pooch it back, do a couple thread wraps edge to edge going to the bend. Now look where that hackle tip is. It's back here. So I can come in here, catch it. You can use hackle pliers if you have mine too. This doesn't have much of a hackle presence, but it has hackles. So I'll bend these in. Wrap it. And typically I have a bodkin in my fingers because when you pull hackle around, there's going to be barbs here at the base of the hackle that get pinched under the barb, or under the hook shank. So you can pick those out, bend the hackle, wrap it again, pull it back, pooch those out, and now this one other unique thing about this pattern is that the eye the head is red. Kind of like the red beetle thing again. I'll get that tag end off of there. Now when you're going to change your thread,
And say again, what kind of feather was that?
it's called a furnace feather. That's the name of it. It's mainly because of the coloration on it. But we're going to change your thread color to avoid extra lumps. One thing you can do, this is the one time I use red, if the pattern traditionally requires a red head. A little cleanup going on. So now I've still got my white thread on there. I'm going to take my red thread and lay it right behind the eye, do a jam hitch, wrapping edge to edge toward the bend, and every wrap of that thread is capturing the white thread underneath it. So you can see how my bobbin holder on the bottom is moving backward as I wrap the red thread. Move that red thread back to the front. That's GSP. If you can also take a piece of GSP and leave it in the glove box of your truck. If you ever need to tow anything, use the GSP thread. It's really strong. And create the kind of head that I'm looking for here. And since this is a small head, one thing you can actually do is apply your head cement or even UV resin right now onto the thread. So for example, I could use, this is healthy hoof, I could use head cement, or I could use UV resin, and just and when you do this, lift the thread up so the thread is tilted down toward the eye. If you do it like this with the thread hanging down, it's going to run down the thread. You want to avoid that. So now I've got some head cement, so to speak, on the thread. I'm just going to do edge-to-edge wraps like a whip finish right there. I can call that good, or I could go back in and do a whip finish if I wanted to do that too, on a small head, just like that. Now on your whip finishes, begin your whip finishes as far from the eye as you can get them, and wrap the whip finish toward the eye, edge to edge. Even on a whip finish, you don't want to allow that wrap to go over the preceding wrap. That weakens the whole deal. So that would be a Koki Bondi right there. And we'll have time, I think, for one more. Okay. This one is a fly called the Shaky Beely. And I wanted to show you this one because it's got some special things about it. On this one I'm using, once again, a fire hole stick. This is a size 12 all-purpose hook. Purpose hook. It's actually got a hook shank to it, and without getting into a whole lot of detail on it, the anatomy of a hook is very, very important in the sense that this would be called a ring eye or straight eye hook, and you've got a straight portion here. Another one that we will use is, I like to use round bend hooks very often because I can get a straight shank. And this portion right here, it's important to pay attention to this because the straight portion of the hook shank right here, and it's typically on most patterns, most hook types will be right above where the barb is supposed to be. That's where the bend is going to begin. It's called the start of the bend. The start of the bend. This is important because if you're going to put a tail on a fly, you want to make sure you pay attention to where that hook shank stops and the start of the bend begins. Because if you put your tail on too far into the start of the bend, your tail goes down instead of straight out. So you need to pay attention to that on your fly. Now this one I like to use a copper color of flash. And this fly, it was actually created by a guy that had a furniture store in San Diego. And he loved to fly fish in the Yellowstone National Park. And so in the summertime, he would leave his furniture store and go work as a seasonal park ranger in Yellowstone. And he did that so he could go there and fish. Well, his name was Frank Bealey, and the story is that Mr. Bealey would get so excited the days that he had a chance to go fish that he would actually tremble and he would shake. And so they started calling him Shaky Bealey. Well, he and the guys at the Blue Ribbon Flies in West Yellowstone came up with this pattern, and they named it after him because of his dedication to fly fishing in the Yellowstone Park. So I'm going to take this flash, and I'm doing edge to edge, finding the edges, the tips, and then coming down to the bottom and having it, cutting it in half. I'm actually going to do one more. Cut that in half. So we're going to begin this with jam hitch back here just in front of the hook point, going toward the bend, capturing my thread right at the point where the hook shank stops and the bend of the hook begins. And here I'm going to take this bundle of flash and tie it in just beyond the bend of the hook. So it's got a and this is a pinch wrap. I just bring the thread up, stick the thread between my fingers. Now the tension's off. Continue around, and I can place that thread exactly where I want it. And all tightening wraps go straight up. Straight up. Straight up. So now that little bitty tail is in there. That's all. It's more of a shuck, a trailing shuck, than anything. And now I'm going to take, this is moose mane, and it's kind of unusual for a tail like this, but the wing on, or the collar on this is going to be moose mane, and it's really pretty special. So I'm going to take this, just one piece like this, pinch it straight up, bring all this okay. Now that moose mane is intended to just be kind of wispy looking, and not a mayfly type of tail. Then one more piece. Nope, I'm going to use peacock curl for the body. Once again, I like peacock curl. And I'm going to wrap this in and go up to about the 2/3 mark behind the eye. That's about there. Now, some interesting things happen on this fly right about here. You won't see those on too many patterns, but on this pattern, we could take a piece of ostrich pearl, and once again, we're going to peel those little barbs off the base, remembering that stem or rachis is flat, very difficult to control as you tie it in. I'm going to tie it in with the prominent rachis facing me. That's the bottom side there. That's the top side. I'm going to tie that in with the prominent rachis facing me, just like that. Secure that butt. Take the pearl, wrap it, left off the rest of that pearl. I realize that. Now this is, in particular, kind of a unique thing on this fly. I could put a regular hackle on here, and it would be just fine. That's what the original pattern calls for. But this right here is worth the price of admission. This is a woven hair hackle. It's not a feather. It looks like an eyelash. There's a fellow named Franz Potts, came from Germany, settled into Missoula. He was a wig maker, became a barber in Missoula, and became an avid fly fisherman. Can't help it, living in Missoula. Well, he developed a way to make this wing, or this collar, weaving hair just like he was making a wig. Now here's the beauty of this. Here's the shaky beely finish. Look at the hackle on this.
Bring it down just a little bit, Tej. Yeah, thank you.
Look at the hackle on that. Now, if that was a feather hackle, and you throw that in the water, what happens to that feather hackle? That's exactly right, Art. It compresses against the body of the fly. The same thing is true of any kind of a soft hackle fly. I love soft hackle flies, but the hackle barbs compress when they get wet. These don't. Because that's woven hair hackle, when this fly gets wet, that fly right there, when that gets wet, those hackle barbs stay out, away from the hook shank. And the beauty of this is, as those hook barbs, or those woven hair hackle barbs are away from the hook shank, they wiggle. And even in current, even in retrieving, or even in real fast current, the hackle stays away from the hook shank. So unlike normal hackle from a feather, you're getting a ton of movement off of this fly simply because that hackle now stays away from the hook shank and moves. And that animation or that movement of the hackle makes fish crazy. Pass that one around too. That's a finished one. So I'm going to take this. I laid it down here. Okay, here's the. I'm going to take this hackle, and to make this, you take individual hairs from moose mane, ox, badger, bull elk mane, long, straight hair fiber. You take about 5 at a time off of a hide, line up the tips, hair stack them, line up the tips, cut the butts so they're even too, dip them in glue, lay them aside so the glue end sticks out over an edge, let it dry. That's called a hair stick. for a hackle on this type of a fly, it's going to require 15 or 16 or 17 hair sticks woven just like this to make the collar. Take it off, then you take it off the post when you weave it, tie it in just like this, going forward, come back, tie it in tighter. Trim off that butt. Now I've got the woven hair hackle ready to palmer. Put my thread in the right place. Bring it around. And I can control it. Notice I'm not even using my thread yet. I'm controlling it with the thread that was used to make the hackle. Ah, it just came out. Oh, no. You know what? I anticipated that could happen, so I brought 3 of these. And here's another one, just the same. So
hairdressing is for sure.
don't want too much bulk in that head. So we'll tie this in.
That's, what is that, wire?
No, it's actually GSP, Bill. It's when I weave, I make a loop out of GSP. And that's a whole nother process I could explain another time, but you make a loop and you stick 1 hair stick in the loop at a time and weave it. And after you've done that 15, 16, or 17 times, you get something that looks like an eyelash. Now, if you're free on September 24th, Chris Johnson has asked us to come down in his shop and on a Saturday and demonstrate how you make hair sticks, how you weave hair sticks, and how you dress a fly. And for example, this is called a black creeper. Look at the body, the belly on this fly. That is so unique. It's unbelievable. George Grant designed this fly. He got a patent for this process in 1939. And they called them hard body flies. And critics said it would never work. This fly was the most sold fly for 50 years in Montana.
What's the body on
It's
that?
called the black, pardon me?
What's the body on that?
Jerry, it's a D-rib type of vinyl. You can use flat vinyl, but D-rib actually works better. And black is you don't try to modify what George Grant did. So you use the black vinyl and the orange. It's a really neat technique to build that belly. It's black vinyl.
John, no, also you said GSP. Is it GSP or mono?
I'm sorry, Jack, you're exactly right. This is mono thread. This is mono thread.
I thought that's
That's
what
the
you
GSP
told us.
right there, yeah, you're exactly right. Now, you make hair sticks so that you come out right at the exact point with exactly the right number of you don't want too many hair sticks. Now I can secure this up to my thread, wrap it twice, go over it, and wrap my thread back. Now that's secure. And like the Koki Bondi, this pattern also traditionally has a red head.
Are you also putting these with finishes side by side?
Yes. Jim, any wrap is edge to edge. One main exception to that is if you're stacking deer hair, you want 2 wraps right over top the preceding wrap. You tighten. That flares the hair. Otherwise, it's always edge to edge, whether you're going backward or forward. Same is true on the whip finish. That's why you start the whip finish. If you're going to do it with a tool, you do that with a tool so you can see better. If I'm going to start a whip finish with the thread back here, I can take the whip finish tool and see the vertical portion of the thread. It's going to go right over the hook shank, and now as that goes forward, the next wrap is right in front of the preceding wrap, the next wrap is right in front of that one, right in front of that one, right in front of that one. Never overlap. Now what's beautiful about this is now when I pull this tool out, look where my loop is here. When I pull that through, it goes it's underneath all of those wraps. That's really secure. Almost shaky beely. But the main thing I wanted to show you in that one was this collar, because it's such a dadgum unique deal. And here's another one. This is called a stone hopper. It's a fly that I designed for late in the afternoon in Montana when the current is really strong and there's a glare. I put a collar on this one. It's a George Grant woven hair hackle. And we fished that just a couple weeks ago, and I was astounded that even in the strongest current on the Blackfoot River, any of them, that hackle stayed away from the hook shank, and it wiggles like this, but it doesn't compress. And that's really a special feature of that one. All right? We should stop right there. Any questions before we stop? Anybody?
Question on the black body, it's black body what?
It's called the Black Creeper.
Black creeper?
Black Creeper, yes, sir. And George Grant designed that fly about 1900, got a patent on 1939. He actually wrote a book, a pamphlet, in 1971 that he self-published, and he actually typed every word of the book himself. It's the only thing you're going to find about how to do the hair weave and how to build hair sticks, how to build the Black Creeper. But I had the privilege to tie with George and his nephew, a guy named Frank Johnson. Jerry, you probably know Frank Johnson. Remember him?
Yeah.
But anyway, I learned the techniques from them, and it's called the Black Creeper.
And the name of this book is what?
The Art of Weaving Hair for Flies, something like that. Yeah.
I did find it on Amazon.
It's still some around, yeah. But
And it's the original typewritten.
Yeah, it's not a hardbound book. It's what I
Like
call
no Underwood typewriter too. It's
Yeah.
not one of the modern-
it's typewriter, and
Yeah.
when you look it up, it's not neat looking like we see today. It's typewriter, but he did it all himself, and he designed the technique. And he and Franz Pott. There's another thing called a Pott's weave. There's another fly called a sandy mite, where Pott's weave is actually how Franz Potts would weave hair for a wig. He applied that to a body on a fly. It's spectacular. And it doesn't come apart. It's really durable. Okay?
Great. Thank you very much. So let's take a break, come back at 7 o'clock for our general meeting. Stay around and visit, or go get a bite to eat, and come back for the general meeting at 7 o'clock.
And for those that didn't get them, we have handouts up front for the flies, if you want them.